What is up, guys? Today on the Football Guys Dynasty Football Show, we're diving into Dynasty startup strategies, player value, some news out there, maybe some trades. We're going to get into that. But we do want to mention on the YouTube channel and for the podcast, we are recording this a little early before free agency. So we're going to be diving into what we know now. And it's still relevant because Dynasty is still relevant, but we still don't know some of these landing spots for some of these guys. We'll be definitely doing that next week. But for this week, we're going to be looking at other stuff. We don't get to pick our times. Alfredo just picks all the good times, not us. So that's what they get. You're even talking about us. We get the crumbs here, but that's okay. We're used to it. So let's start with Tyler Lockett. Tyler Lockett is staying in Seattle on a restructured deal. 2 years, $30 million. I think the elephant in the room is Jaxon Smith-Njigba, right? So what are we doing with JSN? A lot of talk out there about just, he's a dead asset. I've seen the word bust like 75 times in terms of talking about him as a fantasy asset. I see a lot of people re-rolling at the 107 in terms of the deals and Dynasty and all that. Where are we at with JSN with this news with Lockett, Jeff?
Buying. Buying, it's a great price. It's a great opportunity to buy. I think people are entirely too sure that he's going to be the number 3 option coming into next year, because Tyler Lockett's coming off one of his, if you look at the advanced stats, one of his worst years of his career, 32 years old, takes a little bit less deal, kind of renegotiates so he'd make sure he doesn't get cut. That tells me that he's pretty realistic about his future, and the team's probably pretty realistic about where they value him. There's no reason why Jaxon Smith-Njigba shouldn't be the number 2 option on that offense, and maybe even the number 1 option on that offense, depending on how they structure that offense, the direction they want to go, where they want to put those targets. And so I think that's one of the biggest opportunities to buy. I know that his numbers weren't there at the end of the year, but when you turned on the tape and you watched him play, he had that game-winning touchdown against the Eagles on Monday Night Football. He made several plays throughout the season. And you got to remember, too, that this is a player that he really missed his final year in college, barely played that at all, then was injured right going into camp. And so he dealt with those injuries, dealt with that time off, and he still solidified himself into that rotation. And I think that, just like I said, being definitive about him being the number 3 option is just the wrong way to play this.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I think when you start to look at what that new offense is going to look like, I think you can be encouraged about what JSN's usage is going to be. The new offensive coordinator is coming over from Washington. They ran a pro style scheme, so you can kind of 1-for-1 translate it to the NFL, and there won't be a whole lot of change. Obviously, there will be some things that they alter, but Jalen McMillan was the slot wide receiver for that offense over the last 2 years, and Jalen McMillan averaged over 5 targets per game this last year. He was kind of dealing with health issues, so he was never really fully healthy. But the year before, he averaged 9 targets per game. The slot wide receiver in this offense is a very, very major part of what they need to do or what they want to do. And so when you start to look at that, you start to look at, okay, Jaxon Smith-Njigba was actually quite good for them last year. And so I'm not very concerned. But Kevin, you did mention re-rolling at the 107. If you're in a league that you know that the 4 quarterbacks might go before that pick, I'm interested in that, because I think if you have a chance to get Rome Odunze or Malik Neighbors, and I think you have to be very sure of that, though, because if then you get into that tier below that, you're trading Jaxon Smith-Njigba for maybe Brock Bowers, or maybe it is like a JJ McCarthy or something like that. I preferred JSN in those instances, but if you can guarantee that you're getting one of those big 3 receivers, re-rolling is a fine strategy. I'd prefer to have Jaxon Smith-Njigba on all my rosters, though.
Yeah, I think so. When I'm looking at JSN too, I just wanted for context. I'm a big context guy. So you can throw out all the stuff, but for context out there, I think the important thing to remember is the wide receivers on Seattle's roster. So DK, let's look at DK, how he finished last year. He had 2 top 10 finishes last year in basically the entire season. That was it. And one came against Dallas. He had a broken play, looked great. He scored a touchdown, long touchdown there. And then he had a top 10 in PPR against the Rams. After that, his best finish was 15, and he was mostly outside the top 20 in terms of PPR finishes there. Now, Lockett was there in terms of that value, and you saw Lockett kind of be that wide receiver too. But he's also inconsistent as bets, and he's getting older too. It doesn't I think that, like, to me, one thing I don't understand about Dynasty too much and how people play it, like, no one's feeling very good about drafting DK Metcalf. They're kind of fading DK Metcalf based on ADP. Then you're looking at Tyler Lockett, where they're not comfortable there. Jeff, you couldn't make Jeff draft a 33-year-old wide receiver in Dynasty. Like, Jeff he would go old, like the old Tales in the Crypt person. Like, it would ruin his life. So if that's the narrative, why aren't we going after JSN in the 5th, 6th, 7th round with his value going where it's going? Like, it would make more sense to me that JSN has a chance to be wide receiver 1 in the Seattle Seahawks this year, coming year, like, not wide receiver 3. Yes, he still has that. And that's the thing I mentioned too about the offense. I love that offense where he's going to be in. It's going to be more relevant. His snap share is going to go up. So if you combine his snap share, even at wide receiver 3, with his talent, I'll take the chance on it. It's always a risk, but I'll take the chance on that value there. But I think it's weird that, like, people are like, oh, he's the wide receiver 3, but everybody's fading those other wide receivers in Dynasty. Well, then who are you going to grab? Because this is an offense that you should want.
Well,
Christian, you got
just the context of his early season involvement too. I mean, Jaxon Smith-Njigba was hurt coming into the year, playing with a partially broken hand, and so if we don't have that scenario coming into this year, I think you're going to hear the camp hype. I know you're going to hear the camp hype, where it's Jaxon Smith-Njigba's killing it in practices and all of these things. I do believe that as they move forward, the smart strategy was to keep Tyler Lockett on this deal, just simply because you want good players. You want to surround Geno Smith with a lot of good options. But I do think that there's a strong chance, like you guys are both mentioning, that Jaxon Smith-Njigba is the wide receiver 1 for this team. And when we talked about him as a prospect, he was always that high ceiling PPR play because of how reliable he is and because he can win at all 3 levels. So I'm excited about JSN.
I do want to note
me
too
stop talking about him.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Now I want to note too, DK Metcalf, he's got 2 years left on his deal, and going into next year, they can trade him, and it would be very, very favorable to their cap. It would be they'd save about $22 million. The hit would only be about $7 million if they were to decide to trade him. So, I mean, that can always be an option that, they could decide, hey, Jaxon Smith-Njigba is our primary receiver. We're going to trade DK Metcalf. And then what happens to Jaxon Smith-Njigba's dynasty value going in next offseason?
Yeah. No, 100%. Now, for context, for some trades going on out there, I took 2 of ours. Me and Jeff actually made 2 trades this week for JSN. I moved the 112 and Calvin Ridley for JSN. So, and it's a contending roster. I get rid of Ridley. I did not want Ridley. I got to get rid of Ridley off of my dynasty rosters. And in the 112, to me, that's really back in kind of wide receiver. We've been talking about that, but then some running backs in that range. I'm okay giving up that, as a title contender, won the league last year. So that's what I got JSN for. Jeff traded him for Mike Evans, Jalen Warren, and David Montgomery. You want to expand on that deal a little bit?
Yeah, I just saw an opportunity. I think that kind of sell high maybe on Mike Evans, or maybe the last type sell window on Mike Evans and buy low on Jaxon Smith-Njigba. I mean, David Montgomery was kind of the freight maybe to make that switch happen. Jalen Warren was in the deal, and people love Jalen Warren. I don't see it. I mean, being 25, 26 in an Arthur Smith offense, I think that Arthur Smith offense is going to love Najee Harris, and it's going to spread the ball between the two of them. And I'm really skeptical that you're going to get anything out of Jalen Warren outside of maybe occasional running back 2 type, injury fill-in type there. And Montgomery, I think, is a little bit of a sell high probably too. Like we saw Jamal Williams have that great season in Detroit and then kind of fall off a little bit. Montgomery should be able to do that again for the Lions, but if anything happens to him at all, like that value is going to zap right out in Dynasty.
Yeah. And to be honest, with the picks and where I value him, wherever JJ McCarthy goes, 108, I'm above that. So 109 to 112, I wouldn't mind flipping for JSN. That's my value based on where I look at there. Now, be sure to check out our rookie guide promo, rookie guide. Well, I just, Ron Burgundy did that. A rookie guide at rookieguide.com, footballguys.com there. We have our version 2 coming out with the RAS scores and the combine and our consensus rankings. So be on the lookout for that this week.
Yep, we also have Football Guys Fridays on Reddit. Every Friday, the Football Guys analysts or multiple will be taking over the subreddit for the fantasy football community over there. It's an AMA series, tackles the combine, free agency, the NFL draft. I believe this week we've got David Alfredo taking over. Next week will be Jagger May. Week after, we've got Sigmund Bloom over there, and then Matt Waldman the week after that. So they drop a post early in the week. People get their questions in. You'll see a lot more about this, but make sure you head over to Reddit, get your questions answered. We don't always have an opportunity to do like AMAs on this show. Ironically, we do have some questions that we're talking about on the podcast, but not every show has that opportunity. You can go do that at Reddit on Football Guys Fridays.
Yeah, before we move on, make sure you take a moment, like the video, subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode. Comment below. What do you think about JSN? Are you moving him there? We're going to get into other deals right now and some other player values as well. So be sure to go through that and just leave us the comments there. So Baker Mayfield signs a 3-year deal today. That's Christian's guy. Baker Mayfield jumped in. Big fan of Baker Mayfield, and we're happy for him. He's one of those guys. He played his way into a contract. He would have probably been out of the league had he not, performed the way he did. Signs a 3-year deal. Mike Evans also coming back. We talked about that last week. So what do we think of this offense? Where are we looking at with Baker, QB2 and Superflex now? As your QB2, you probably be okay and pretty excited about that. Going in that kind of that QB 18 to 24 range, depending on ADP, depending on where your drafts are at there. What was your takeaway from this, Jeff?
I mean, good for them. I think kind of it's one of those things. They were right there with Detroit, making it into the playoffs and potentially knocking the Lions off. So to run it back, I think that there's encouragement. Obviously, Baker Mayfield was the number 1 overall pick in his draft, and we've seen some good stretches of football from him. I do think he is one of the top 20 quarterbacks in the league. And so to put him in that kind of that top half where you really want him to be a starting quarterback right now is fine. We're going to see the departure of Dave Canales, and so as offensive coordinator. So I'm going to wonder how that kind of plays out, and bringing in Liam Cohen as offensive coordinator. People don't really love Liam Cohen, so I think that's going to be interesting to see how that all works out. And we're really kind of it's almost like last year where people were completely out in the Seattle Seahawks with Geno Smith and everything heading into the 2022 season, and then they had a great year, surprising year. Going into 2023, everybody was buying in and ready to go, and we saw some disappointment there. And so I think that sometimes you see these scenarios with these offenses that come out of nowhere, surprise. In fantasy, for sure, ADPs get jacked up, and then they can't really repeat and deliver on that. And so I'm hoping the best for him. I think it's fantastic for Baker. I think it's thrilled. I'm thrilled for him the way that the 2022 season went, with him kind of losing his job in Cleveland, going to Carolina, that just being a complete dumpster fire, then kind of having to just rectify anything with the Rams to end the season, kind of take what he could get from the Bucks, and he really made good on that. And so I think that that's a fantastic story.
Yeah, it's a $50 million guaranteed in his deal, so he's locked in. It's essentially kind of structured as a 2-year deal with an out after the 3rd year. All of the guaranteed money, I believe, is had in the first 2 years. So
Yes.
This is kind of like we're going to run it back with a new offensive coordinator and see what it's like. It's not dissimilar to the Daniel Jones contract, except that I think that they do plan on Baker being their starter because of what Baker did in 2023 was better than anything Daniel Jones has ever done. What I think it has done for free agency is created kind of this middle tier of quarterback contracts, which I think is interesting as we move into free agency. We'll see what the deals are like after you're listening to this episode, of course, but it's certainly interesting from that perspective. From a fantasy perspective, I think I'd be more comfortable with Baker as my QB3 from a points per game perspective. I know the strategy that we often talk about is going and getting 2 elite guys, and then I'd like to have something safe as my QB3. Yeah. I think Baker is that. Last year he finished as the QB 11 overall, but in points per game he was down at QB 19, and so I think he's on that border where you consider throwing in a high upside wide receiver instead in your super flex spot. And so from that perspective, I think that, I'd certainly rather a lot of quarterbacks, but what this does is it guarantees him a starting role for 2 years, I think. And so you're feeling pretty safe about him as an asset. I think a lot of people are going to get a little crazy with his value based on this deal. And I would caution people, I wouldn't buy high on Baker. But if you do see value there, I think he's worthy of putting on a roster at this point.
I would try to use the Baker news to go get Jared Goff. like I try to tear up a little bit. And honestly, maybe if he's getting value there, definitely feel like he's in that tier. I did want to ask Jeff this question. So let's say he is your QB3. Who do you feel more comfortable with being in that QB3, maybe QB2 role? Him or Deshaun? Because they're getting value the same. So Deshaun Watson and him are both getting valued exactly the same. And I know the narrative's out there with the Cleveland thing, but that's not why I mentioned it. But they are literally getting value back to back, even in our rankings, if I could pull them up. What are we thinking there?
Sean Watson. I think Watson's interesting. Watson's I don't know. Leaving things behind, Watson is a bit of a dynasty acquisition for me, even at this valuation, because I think when you look at last year, he still had multiple quarterback 1 weeks when he was able to be on the field, and the Browns were a very good football team. And I think that it's interesting because I think that he kind of got washed into maybe the Dorian Thompson-Robinson narrative with Joe Flacco coming in, where when Watson was injured, they were far off from having competent quarterback play. So when Flacco came in, it was a lot of excitement. It was Joe Flacco rekindling his career. And I think that people thought that Watson was playing terribly. I don't think Watson was playing terribly. I think Watson was playing okay. He just wasn't playing to the established level of Deshaun Watson that we had seen previously. And so that's the thing there. And I think that his ceiling is so much higher than Baker still, in my opinion. And that's kind of where I would go.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at it, I think Deshaun could maybe get in that QB 15 range next year at this time. Like, oh yeah, of course, he's kind of in that there. Where Baker, I think QB 19 to 22 in that range is kind of what he's at for the next 2 years. So that's just something to know. I mean, they're getting value literally back to back in terms of now, maybe not in your league, and league specific has always changed. Context is always important there. But if you could pivot Baker to Deshaun, I think that might be the move you try to do if it's possible. Other guys, Christian, in that offense before we move on to the next one. Evans, Godwin, Rachaad White. I mean, we saw the dump downs last year. Baker doesn't mind dumping down to his running backs. We saw that value there. Godwin feels like in the weird train here, though. He did not look good with Baker. We didn't see the targets. We didn't see the usage there. Are you concerned about that? What are you doing with this offense? Who are you buying? Who are you selling in it?
I mean, Mike Evans is the clear winner, I think, from this, because Baker has shown over the years that he prefers to target one guy. When he was with Cleveland, I think at times that was his tight end. I think it's pretty much the guy that he trusts the most, and I think that's clearly Mike Evans at this point. I do think Rachaad White is going to be maybe not as highly valued after this year as he is this offseason, but I also think that this staves off some of that concern that they would go get a different quarterback in there. One that I saw floated out there was if they missed out on Baker and he left, they were going to turn to Justin Fields because they're kind of out of range for one of those other quarterbacks. That wouldn't have been good for Rachaad White. I think this is clearly better. But also, I think when you're looking at what Rachaad White did last year, I think when you factor in Liam Cohen coming in, I think overall this offense has a lower ceiling than we saw with Dave Canales. So in terms of the guy that I want, it's Mike Evans. And then outside of that, I do hope they add a little bit to this room. I think Trey Palmer is an interesting guy because we saw some moments with him and Baker where that could be a thing if Trey Palmer takes a step forward. And I do think that they're going to start to look to move on from Chris Godwin because they're throwing money around like crazy. I wouldn't be shocked if Chris Godwin isn't on this roster week 1 either, to be honest.
Yeah, post June 1, they can trade Chris Godwin and save $20 million. He's essentially expiring deal, 2025 and 2026 void on his contract. So that could be an opportunity. And Trey Palmer kind of reminds me of the weird thing that Baker had with Rashad Higgins in Cleveland, where it was like just kind of Baker gets his dudes and Palmer might be one of them.
Yeah. All right, let's get into some other we're going to lump these things together. Jerry Jeudy got traded to the Cleveland Browns. Marvin Mims sitting there is, I don't know. People love Marvin Mims. People are all about Marvin Mims there. And we can talk about value there. Mac Jones goes to Jacksonville for a 6th-round pick there. So very quick moves that we're just going to mention on the show sheet today. Just kind of talk about them there. Go any way you want, Jeff. Any of these guys that you'd like to talk about. You can talk about all three if you like. I know you like to go on your tangents. But what were your takeaways from these three?
I don't know that people love Marvin Jones or Marvin Mims so much as people love the idea of a draft pick that they thought they had blown, having an opportunity and having that second chance. And I think that that's what a lot of the reaction and the emotion that you see with Marvin Mims, because for all the excitement about Marvin Mims, I don't think people are buying Marvin Mims, like not nearly as excited as they are. People are just thrilled because they used a mid to late second or an early third on him last year. They thought they wasted that pick because he didn't do anything his rookie year, and now they have hope. And so that is a hope is a dangerous thing. So that's going on. I mean, I think he's an explosive player who can be a big play threat. I just don't know that I expect any sort of consistent volume to happen there. Jeudy is a Brown. So is I mean, Amari Cooper and David Njoku, I think the offense is going to flow through them, and that's a nice pickup for the Browns to add some depth because they did need to add a receiver. Really kills Cedric Tillman in having any sort of dynasty value, but at the same time, I think they gave him a shot after they traded Donovan Peoples-Jones, and he didn't really deliver on where they wanted it to. So we saw David Bell kind of step up towards the very end of last year, and now they went out and got Jeudy. So that's kind of where that sits, and I think Elijah Moore is more or less dead.
I've been pushing back on that notion to I have a lot of Browns fans being in Ohio, and they seem to think the same. But I would argue that if you go back and you watch a lot of the Cleveland film, the quarterbacks weren't really finding Elijah Moore. That was my problem with Deshaun Watson last year. Was he was having the same problems that Baker Mayfield did in this offense, where Elijah Moore is just running wide open across the field, and Deshaun Watson couldn't hit him. So now what I think this does is this just gives them three guys that they're going to figure out who they want to keep, because Jerry Jeudy is on an expiring deal as well. Elijah Moore is, I believe, going to be done after this year as well. So that's my other thing with Cedric Tillman is I think there's a shot that Cedric Tillman does step in at some point this year. We know kind of the health of all three of those players has been up and down. I wouldn't be completely out. And I do think that when you start to, like, if someone's throwing me like a fifth or something, if I can throw a fifth for Cedric Tillman, I would be interested in that. Jerry Jeudy's upside now is not different from when he was with Denver. I saw someone say Deshaun Watson's the best quarterback he's played with. Russell Wilson is a better quarterback than Deshaun Watson. And I know it didn't look like it all the time last year, but I think I would say that Russell Wilson at this moment is a better quarterback. So I think Jerry Jeudy's upside remains the same, especially with Amari Cooper there. So to me, this, if anything, it does help Watson because Jerry Jeudy can get open, and I think that he can be a little more reliable than what they've had. But none of those moves really, changed much for me from a fantasy perspective, other than I do like the opportunity that Marvin Mims is going to get. I am interested. I'm one of the people that is interested in that because I also think that Cortland Sutton might be off the team soon. They seem interested in bringing Tim Patrick back into the fold and making sure that he is involved in getting targets. And there has been a lot of rumors that Denver is not done making moves. And so if Cortland Sutton is shipped off and Marvin Mims walks into a number one target share, I'd be interested in that.
It gets you someone that loves you like Cedric, or the Broncos love Cedric Tillman. That man, like they love or not Cedric Tillman, Tim Patrick. They love Tim Patrick. Tim Patrick is their guy. Yeah, no, I want to go through values real quick. So just talk about kind of where they get moved to Jeff's point about Mims. Like, so really he's getting moved for any kind of second in the second round. Like I've seen him from 201 to 212 going through all the databases and stuff like that. Marvin Mims for Chase Brown, I think is interesting. With Joe Mixon possibly getting cut with Chase Brown is there. Would you rather take the shot on the running back that could see the volume? And yeah, they might, go after a running back in the draft or whatever, or possibly free agency, but they might not. Jerry Jeudy, some values out there, 210, DeMario Douglas, Dontayvion Wicks in the 206. Like that, generally speaking, I don't mind just sitting on Jeudy for all of that, to be honest with you, because, there could be upside. We're just talking about Deshaun Watson possibly being a riser. Jeudy's going to have to go with that, but Jeudy has not been good. Jeudy has not been a very good football player. And as much as I've never really been a truther for Jeudy, I've never been one that's bought Jeudy and said, hey, he could maybe break out. He has not looked good in any shape. He struggled with drops. He struggled to stay healthy. He just doesn't look like a NFL wide receiver at times. And I think that should concern you a little bit. So if you want to re-roll to 210, that's pretty low. If it's early second, I might take that shot there. But anything else on the values, Jeff, that you see that you're outlining, or even Mac Jones going from Marvin Mims, Rashid Shaheed. I know we didn't mention him. You might want to take a shot trading for Mac Jones on if you have some, guys on the end of your bench that you want to kind of, just re-roll a pivot off of, there's always guys out there you might be able to add a super flex quarterback. Look at the guys that started this last year. Look at Baker. Look at some of these. Sam Darnold saw some roles after that first year with the Jets after he was in Carolina. Like Mac Jones could have that trajectory, maybe, possibly. And if you can maybe pivot off of that for a guy you don't really want on the back end of your roster, that could be also an option.
The Dontavian Wicks in the 206 deal for Jerry Jeudy is interesting to me. I would take that Wicks in the 206 side all day. And I think that Wicks is in an ambiguous situation. I think with maybe probably a better quarterback and probably a better offense, to be honest. And he's got a chance to emerge there relative to kind of what you're hoping for Jeudy. And then to get the 206, I mean, depending on who you're drafting with, that might be, I think McConkey's probably off the board, especially if you're drafting post-draft. But you're starting to look at that range of like the Braylon Allen or like Jonathan Brooks type range at that 206. And I think that's a pretty good reroll on the value on Jeudy. The other ones, I think you're right there and probably just sit there. I don't know. I mean, this is what we have to talk about because all the exciting things are going to happen between the time we're recording this episode and the time that this episode comes out. So
no, we make things exciting. No excuses. No excuses there. Christian, any final thoughts there?
The Demario Douglas one is kind of intriguing to me as well, simply because I don't think the Patriots have explosive players. Kendrick Bourne did re-sign. Kevin said he wasn't going to talk about him, but I'll talk about him really, really quickly. Kendrick Bourne re-signed with the Patriots. So right now they're starting two wide receivers. Or their best two wide receivers would be Kendrick Bourne and Demario Douglas. That may change in the draft. That may change in free agency. They are rumored to be heavily involved in Calvin Ridley discussions, and they really want to pay him a lot of money. More power to you guys. I don't know if that's a smart idea, but Demario Douglas to me is one of those safe-ish PPR guys with a new offense with something, not Mac Jones throwing him the football, which I think is very important because Mac Jones was absolutely terrible last year. I would, if I could get Marvin Mims or Rashid Shaheed for Mac Jones right now, I'd send that immediately. I don't think I have Mac Jones on any roster because I'm a hater. But if I had him, I would send those offers out right now.
I remember some Mac Jones QB1 of his class takes out there by some pretty big analysts. All right, players on the move. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about guys that we think could be traded as we come into this and where their value is at. Then we'll move on over to the full podcast. If you're on YouTube right now, we're gonna be talking about some proactive moves to make. So make sure you go over to the podcast if you're on there on YouTube. But players to move. So it looks like Deontay Johnson possibly could be moving. Now we hear this every offseason, it feels like. Right now he's wide receiver 45 in terms of keep trade cut and their value there. Could be interesting. We've heard a little things like Arizona could be, a landing spot. Some of these other landing spots there are interesting there. Some value he's going for recently. Deontay straight up for Jameson Williams and Deontay for the 202. In a startup right now that I'm looking at with ADP, Deontay Johnson is still on the board in round 12. So that's where his value's at. It's pretty much the lowest I've ever seen it in terms of dynasty value right now. Do you have a landing spot, Jeff, that you like? Are you in or out on Deontay? He's 27, in terms of that. So he's not necessarily old. I mean, he might be old to you. But he has that value there. What are you doing with Deontay?
I actually I've done one startup this year and I drafted Deontay in the startup that I did. So that tells you where I'm, and what that means for me. So
that's a big step for you. I feel like it was
definitely the value that you're talking about though, with him like being like, I think that, I mean, Buffalo would be a fantastic landing spot, but to pair him with Josh Allen, I think Dallas would be a really interesting landing spot to kind of, I think that it kind of seems like they're going to move from Michael Gallup, and I know they still have Cooks there, but to kind of pair Deontay Johnson and CeeDee Lamb moving forward as the primary receivers would be kind of fun for that offense. Really just get him anywhere with a solid quarterback. I mean, the Chiefs, obviously. I'm assuming the Steelers would view themselves as a contender because they never not view themselves as a contender and would try to send him outside of the AFC. But I think Dallas, if I'm looking at the NFC, seems like a really good spot. Or maybe even Detroit would be an interesting spot.
I think the Saints also, if they move on from Michael Thomas, I don't know what their cap thing is. I'm not sure what the Saints are doing with their cap, but they'll make it work. And I think if Deontay maybe can fit in there with Olave and Shaheed and those guys, that could be interesting as well.
I think he's going to be the Bears wide receiver too.
Oh,
when all is said and done. I think Deontay
okay.
Johnson's going to get shipped in a Justin Fields deal. I think that Ryan Poles is going to look at adding a tackle early or trading back. That's my theory right now. Of course, as we record this, Deontay Johnson might be on another team when you're listening to this. So I do want to mention, I think that this is a good opportunity to grab him now before he's moved. If he has already been moved, I think the market's going to shoot up depending.
Oh yeah.
Because right now the outlook is still pretty bleak. If he stays in Pittsburgh, I think, there's rumors that they're adding a quarterback. I think that could be the case, but there's also a chance that they roll it back with Kenny Pickett, which I think is problematic. The 202, I would take the 202 for Deontay Johnson pretty easily because I think you can get maybe a better wide receiver that's about 7 years younger. Because I also want to mention Deontay is turning 28 this summer, so he'll be 28
Oh.
before he plays another snap. And so we're starting to get into that range where we've seen some maybe not signs of slowing down from players right at 28, but it's certainly the production starts to fall off pretty close to that. So I'd be willing to move off of him in those scenarios. Jameson's an interesting ad as well, but I think I'd rather have Deontay hoping that he goes somewhere where he can kind of show off a little bit more than what he has in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
It's important to realize too, we're sitting in early March, prior to free agency and prior to the draft. So you're holding Deontay Johnson right now, even if you buy Deontay Johnson right now, he's got a great opportunity to increase his value before he even plays a snap in the 2024 season. I think that that's the type of thing to take a look at because you're sitting 5-6 months away before actual football starts, and so some of these guys that have paths to increase value, you don't need to keep them on your roster just because you think they're going to be in better spots. So you can flip that and kind of realize that value.
You don't have to fill your lineup in March. You just have to collect value. Like that is the key point, that that Jeff said there. And I think it's just good to reiterate it. Just go out there and look for dudes at this market that you can just trade for that are going to increase. JSN's part of that. That's why we spent the show on him at the beginning part of it. Stephon Diggs, who I'm going to go to now. He could possibly be part of that. Maybe. We'll see. But Jeff feels like we've talked about it. So he is $27 million against the cap next season. Stephon Diggs for the Buffalo Bills. He's sitting at wide receiver 33. If he's traded after June 1st, that saves the Bills $19 million against the cap. The way the Bills are kind of navigating free agency so far and who they've kind of let go. I mean, Jeff's the Bills guy, but he got to see that there's, I don't want to call it a rebuild because you have Josh Allen. It's not a rebuild, but they're retooling for sure. They're pivoting and they're definitely addressing some needs there. Do you think Diggs gets moved? Do they save that $19 million against the cap after June 1st?
I don't expect it. No.
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 So there's a value there at wide receiver 33 if he stays with Josh Allen?
Yeah, I mean, I believe so. I don't know. I mean, if you think he's washed, he's not. But if you think he's still Stephon Diggs with Josh Allen, I mean, I don't know. It has to certainly be better than it was towards the end of last year. Maybe they do trade him. I mean, looking at some of the moves you talked about, I mean, Mitch Morse was 32, and I think the writing was on the wall there a little bit. Trey White, I know, was a huge part of that organization, but as soon as that Achilles injury happened, a lot of the fan base was talking about he's basically played his last snap in Buffalo, given the way his contract was structured. And then Poyer was a little bit surprising, but again, that's another one that I think it's they're just looking to move on.
I think Stephon Diggs is washed, so I don't think he's about. I don't know if he's got it. I don't think he's got it for a full season. And so if you add him to a fantasy roster and you can get maybe 6 weeks out of him and feel pretty good about that, I think what it's going to do is it's going to hurt your lineup in the long haul because you're going to go off name value and you're going to probably want to start Stephon Diggs, and I think it's going to lose you some weeks if you're looking at a week-to-week basis. And I know in Dynasty we don't always look at things on a week-to-week basis, but when these players start getting to that point where the fall off, we kind of already saw the fall off, like Jeff mentioned, late in the last season. If he comes back fresh, I think that there's a real possibility that he is Stephon Diggs for 8 weeks. And then that back half of next year, you're looking at your lineup and you're saying, how am I losing every week? It's because you've got Stephon Diggs in your lineup and he's putting up gooses. So I'm completely out on Diggs. If I can get, I mean, the deal, the Diggs for a 2026 first, sign me up. Sign me up for that because I think if I can get any type of first for Diggs right now, I'm in on that deal.
Yeah. The other deal was a Diggs at 304 for the 108. Like if you need to pair another pick with that to get into that first round, 108, thinking JJ might be sitting there, Troy, Franklin, Brian Thomas Jr., all those type of guys, that might be the way to get back some of that youth and that veterans there. Final take there, Jake or Jeff?
I smashed both of those deals. And I don't know where my head was, but I completely agree with you, Christian. I think Stephon Diggs is washed. I think what we saw towards the end of last year, I mean, we said it on the show, I believe, that I think that the way that he played over the end of last year. And yeah, these are fantastic deals. The 108 for Stephon Diggs, if I can get the 108 for Stephon Diggs and pray that somebody is going to go out there and buy JJ McCarthy, and Rome Odunze or Brock Bowers falls into my lap and I'm able to flip Stephon Diggs for that, that is a W. That is a win.
That was a W. No 40-year-old man should ever say that on a podcast. All right, Justin Fields, real quick. We're going to get out of there real quick. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this. They talked about market maybe slowing. There was a deal that I thought was interesting that just happened yesterday, literally in a Superflex league. It was Fields for Bryce Young. So someone's just selling low on Fields. Like, I don't know if he's going to start next year. I know people are concerned about that. We don't know where the dominoes are. We have not figured out where the dominoes at the quarterback position are as of recording this. So that's also a big part of this. That's why I don't want to spend tons of time on this. But do you believe, you just said that he's going to go to Pittsburgh. Christian just talked about that in some type of deal with Deontay. That I think that would mean, like, I think he's a QB 12 to 14 range, 15 range, probably in terms of value there. Are you concerned about this market, Jeff? Are you concerned he's not going to start next year?
I think he's going to be the starting quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons. Be honest, and I could be very, very wrong by the time this airs, and it could be Kirk Cousins or something.
That's the
I think that there was a lot of steam on that going into the combine, and then that Cousins rumor kind of popped. I think maybe Cousins camp kind of used that. I think that was maybe a scratch my back, I'll scratch your back, where Cousins camp was able to use that on the Falcons and kind of say, hey, like the Minnesota pay us. And then the Falcons are kind of able to say to the Bears, we got other options. We're going to lower that price on Justin Fields that we're willing to give you a little bit. And I think that if Cousins stays in Minnesota, the other way, I don't know that Minnesota would want to make a deal with Chicago, or Chicago would want to make a deal, especially if Chicago still kind of likes Justin Fields. I don't know that you want to send him to Minnesota unless they are really paying that freight, because you don't want to deal with that guy twice a year if you still, 10% still believe in him. You don't want to deal with him twice a year in your division. But I think Atlanta, the narrative's there with him going home. If that opens up, they're not really in a position right now maybe to get one of the guys in the draft short of trading up. I think they could easily make that flip, grab him, lock him in as that starting quarterback and move forward there.
I have a lot of thoughts on this topic, as everyone knows, but I think this whole there's no market for Justin Fields narrative out there is going to change very quickly when a lot of these teams miss out on their top option, or when they start to look at, okay, we've got 2 quarterbacks on our board that we like, because that's one thing. Everyone's like, oh, there are 4 quarterbacks, maybe 5, maybe 6. Not every single one of these teams is going to like all of those guys, and I guarantee that because I know that there are teams that are not in on certain prospects this year. So with that being said, I think that Pittsburgh's my favorite landing spot for Fields. I think that he will start next year. He is one of the 32 best quarterbacks in the league. And I think that a lot of this is the Bears showed their hand way too early. And so teams are like, shoot, they want to do right by him. So they're not going to send him to be a backup. They might just release him. And I think that that's actually on the table as well, and kind of letting Justin pick where he goes if they miss out. A lot of people have floated out the idea that Justin Fields is still on the roster week 1 with Caleb Williams. That I don't think will happen. So with that being said, I think he's a starter next year, which means I would take the deal and flip Bryce Young for Justin Fields. I know it's a little riskier, but I'll play the game of risk if I can get 20 points per game instead of 14, and I can win my league this year, and hope that if I'm getting 20 points a game from Justin Fields, that means he has another contract, or at least his 5th year option was picked up, and then maybe a franchise tag and things like that. So yeah, I don't really want Bryce Young on my rosters. Also, I think that's part of it. I'm sorry, Kevin. I know. All right. The full version of every show can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcast. If you're enjoying the show, make sure you head over there, search up the Football Guys Dynasty Football Show, and catch us. We're going to talk about some proactive dynasty moves and some dynasty questions over there. So check us out. Make sure you subscribe over there as well.